from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. Well, since I was last with you on Thursday evening, the entirely predictable has happened. You know, when Donald Trump tweets the missiles are coming, I thought, yeah, he probably means it. And we had the cabinet meeting that took place on Friday. And, of course, there was no real news came out of that cabinet meeting. So I kind of thought, yeah, it's going to happen. Well, it has happened. About 120 missiles fired into Syria at a variety of sites, many said to be chemical weapons factories, others were military installations. Let's listen to what Theresa May had to say the morning after.
When the Cabinet met on Thursday, we considered the advice of the Attorney-General, the National Security Advisor and the Chief of the Defence Staff. And we were updated on the latest assessment and intelligence picture. And based on this advice, we agreed that it was both right and legal to take military action.
So the government's confident that legally it could do this without the United Nations. Of course, that doesn't work because Russia would simply veto it. And, you know, she believes that she's done absolutely the right thing. And it's interesting. If you look through the Sunday papers this morning, you find a lot of them are very supportive. But one or two ask the question, why was this done without first seeking parliamentary approval? That question is being asked today. Let's listen to hear what Jeremy Corbyn had to say.
Parliament should be consulted, Parliament should be allowed to take a view on this, but instead the strikes were launched. She claims there is a legal basis for it. I've asked her in a letter to publish in full the legal basis and justification for it.
So, Jeremy Corbyn asking legal questions, Jeremy Corbyn saying Parliament should have been consulted, but what we're not seeing virtually anywhere this morning is any outright opposition to what happened, you know, overnight, Friday into Saturday. I find that very, very interesting. I have a hunch, I have a feeling that public opinion is going to be very different to that we're getting from the newspapers, our television screens and our radio airwaves. I think there are quite a lot of people out there concerned about what we're perhaps once again getting ourselves into. That's my thought on it. But let's go. Let's ask Kate Hoey, Labour MP for Vauxhall. And she's had a history of being against these kind of airstrikes. Kate, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So how do you feel about this one, Kate? Was it the right thing to do?
Well, what I really genuinely would have liked, I sat last week expecting Parliament to be called back, because I think there's no doubt about it when there's a parliamentary debate on this that people do genuinely listen. You know, we have this thing about Parliament is shown at its best, but I remember so vividly when we had the debate on the Iraq War, and I went into that debate really not quite sure what I was going to do. And during that debate, I became more and more clear that I was going to oppose because of what I'd heard. And I just wish that the Prime Minister had taken that opportunity to call us back and have a proper debate, because then she would have been given a kind of mandate. If there'd been a vote, it probably would have gone through. And I think it would have given her a kind of feeling that the country would have known then that there was a general discussion on this and that we had gone that way. But having said that, you know, I think we also saw such, you know, some of the Trump texts over the last week or so really looked like it was going to be a huge assault. And I think why people probably have been perhaps more silent than you would have expected is because what we did see was definitely a very targeted, basically on 3 bases that we were told there were chemical weapons. Even the Russians and the Syrians have admitted that there was only, I think, 3 people injured. So it hasn't been that appalling bombing that we saw that went on in you know, previous assaults. Having said that, and then I'll stop. You know, I do think that the worry for me is, where does this lead? You know, is this now just going to lead to Assad feeling that he has to show that he's still in charge and he still can do what he wants? Perhaps another attack of some kind, which will be said to have used chemical weapons. Where are we then? Russia is not going to sit back.
I mean, Kate, clearly what's happening here, I mean, you know, Trump's press spokesman said we're locked and loaded, which means if there's another use of chemical weapons, even if we, I mean, it seems to me, even if we can't prove that it's Assad that did it, and I do, I do note that the New York Times themselves said that ISIS had used chemical weapons 52 times during that civil war.
Oh, there's no doubt about it that some of the rebel groups have had access to certainly chlorine and some of the other chemical weapons that definitely have been used. And I think, again, that is the problem that we could have waited until the Organisation for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons went in. I mean, it's ironic that they actually did this strike the day before they were coming in. And it seems like after 7 years of appalling killings and dreadful things happening in Syria, that suddenly there's this huge rush to do this when...
Well, clearly Donald Trump had decided he was going to do something.
Yeah, yes, but that's why it makes the Prime Minister look as if she is in just simply waiting for Donald Trump. I mean, as Jeremy Corbyn said, because if she had said to Donald Trump, I'm sorry, on the whole we want to support you, but we need to call back our Parliament and have a debate and a discussion on this. And she just didn't do that.
They could have done it.
They could have easily done it.
Yeah, they could have called Parliament for Friday. That wouldn't have been difficult. And I remember, in fact, during the Falklands, Parliament actually met on Saturday.
That's right. I wasn't an MP then, but I remember that. And then, of course, we were called back. We've been called back various times. And the Speaker is very keen always to call people back. Yeah. So I'm sure it would have happened if someone had asked.
If they'd wanted it to. No, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, Trump says they're locked and loaded. The British government have made it clear. So, I mean, it looks like this is not just a one-off attack. They're making it clear any more use of chemical weapons will lead to more attacks. I mean, do you think we're actually going to achieve... I mean, will we achieve anything through what happened the other night?
Well, the problem is Syria is full of minority sects, religious extremists, rebel groups, and has been for a very, very long time. It is a civil war that's going on, but it's not even a civil war where there are two sides. It's a civil war with all sorts of different factions with different aims. And Assad is an appalling dictator, or whatever you'd like to call him. But the reality is that even if he was to go tomorrow, we have no idea who would take over and whether they would be any better. And I think the only way we will get this settled, and it is always a sort of cliche that everybody uses, but it's true, is by some kind of political settlement. And that can only happen if we get the United States and Russia to actually sit down and try and sort something out. And I don't understand why, given that Trump was willing to go and meet the North Korean leader, why he just doesn't, wouldn't it be amazing if he just suddenly got on a plane and
Well, they
went
were
to
talking
Moscow.
about this. I mean,
yes.
2 weeks ago, he did say, I'm going to have a summit with Putin. And, I do know Trump a little bit. My guess is that he will try and have that meeting at some point in time. And I agree with you. It would be a very, very good and sensible thing to do. But when I listen to the language coming out from Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and elements of the US administration, it seems to me they still want Assad to go. They still, effectively, they want regime change, but they're not going to fight for it because that would bring us into conflict with the Russians. I mean, do you think it would be better if Assad went?
I really don't think at this stage it would make any difference whatsoever. And I was pleased that she did say, the Prime Minister, in her statement, this was not about regime change. But I'm afraid, I think the tone of everything that the British government's been saying and the American government is they don't like Assad and they would like him gone. Now, there are a lot of people, particularly Syrians, who have had to leave the country for all sorts of reasons, who would like Assad gone. But, is it our responsibility as the United Kingdom government to make that happen? And, we've seen the results of what we did when we went into Iraq to change the regime, although in theory it was about weapons of mass destruction, which, of course, the intelligence was completely wrong. And that's the other worry, you see. A lot of the public don't feel totally confident now about
they don't trust government. No, they don't.
They don't trust any of us.
I get this on all sorts of subjects. I mean, Salisbury as well. A lot of people now say, whoa, hang on. After WMD, we don't believe what the government tells us. Well, we'll see where we go with this one, but I have a feeling this may not be the last airstrike. I hope I'm wrong. But, Kate, of course, today must be a very busy day for you today, Kate, because, of course, there's a big series. In fact, up in Camden this afternoon, which, of course, they couldn't have that picked a sort of richer district, and there'll be Sir Patrick Stewart, so they've got an actor, and Anna Soubry, and your own colleague Chuka Ramuna, and there's the big campaign, the day of action today, to push us to have another referendum. Will you be attending those rallies?
No, I certainly won't. And I mean, they had a big day of action, I think, across the country yesterday, but I didn't see many people involved in it. You know, I think this is a last gasp kind of an attempt by those who just cannot bear the fact that the British people actually didn't do what they thought they would. In other words, they voted to leave. And I think we just have to, those of us who are on the leave side, and many people all over the country who voted Remain but who just want to get on with it now, I think we just have to sort of almost watch them with a bit of a laugh and say, look, this is just ridiculous. This is not going to happen. And we have to get on with it. And I just hope our government, you know, really gets some muscle and gets into these negotiations and stands up for the country and doesn't feel that they've got to go along with everything the EU says, because we voted to leave, we've got to leave, and we've got to have a great future if we can get out as quickly as possible.
I mean, I was worried a few months ago. I could see how well organised the Remain side were becoming. I think perhaps the key factor now is when Jeremy Corbyn sacked Owen Smith and then Sir Keir Starmer very much came in behind Corbyn and said, you know, there's not going to be a second referendum, we are leaving. That made it pretty clear to me that whatever the deal is, Labour effectively are going to support us leaving on March the 29th next year. Does that feel right to you as a Labour MP?
Yes, I think it will. And even though many of my parliamentary colleagues were strong Remainers, you know, there are a lot of them who don't say very much. There's always a small number who say a lot, but there's a lot of them who don't say very much, who know that they actually have to go along with whatever deal we can get, the best deal possible. And also, of course, Jeremy Corbyn himself, you know, who I've always will stick up for on the issue of the EU, because he has been an opponent all his life
Absolutely.
of the neoliberal kind of corrupt almost way that the EU has worked. And I feel confident that he will not, in the end, let down those Labour voters across the country who voted to leave.
And there's lots of them. There's about 4.5 million, by my calculations, who voted Brexit and then voted for Corbyn in the election. I think you're absolutely right to say that. Kate, thanks very much indeed for joining us on this Sunday morning. Thank you. Well, that was Kate Hervey, Labour MP for Vauxhall. In a minute, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think about these airstrikes in Syria. I do not go with the consensus view that we see from our leading politicians and from our newspaper editorial columns this morning. I take a rather stronger position. But for now, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 10:16. Over the last few days, we've heard all the same voices. Yes, the same voices that supported the war in Iraq, the same voices that supported the war in Libya, the same voices who in 2013 wanted us to arm the rebels against Assad. Good job we didn't listen to them, otherwise we'd have finished up giving guns and money effectively to ISIS. But all the same people arguing again and again and again for military intervention. We're told it'll be okay. This is not about regime change. The Prime Minister made that clear. But if there are any more uses of chemical weapons, we will do it again. And given that we know the opposition to Assad have chemical weapons, seems to me we've given something of a hostage to fortune. The idea that because it's a surgical strike, it'll work and it'll be no problem and teach him a lesson, how does that work? Because last April, Trump on his own did send in nearly 60 cruise missiles, and a year later we're doing the same thing again. So we and the French have backed the Americans on this, and there are many people in America who are Trump supporters who really have a bit of a conflict over this. You know, one of the main reasons Trump got elected was to be against Hillary's continued military intervention. So I know that Trump supporters are very split. But to believe the press this morning, you would think the country overwhelmingly believes it was right to launch these strikes, but maybe there should have been a parliamentary debate on Friday. Well, with or without a parliamentary debate, even if the House of Commons had approved it, as indeed it did with the invasion of Libya and the bombing of Libya, even if they had, my view is we shouldn't be getting involved. And when Theresa May tells us in her speech that we're doing this in our national interest, oh, pull the other one. This is not in our national interest at all. If you believe it'll stop a further use of chemical weapons, then at least you have moral grounds for doing it. Don't try and pretend to me this is in our national interest. It isn't. And my guess, folks, is there are going to be a lot of you out there who agree with my point of view. Hey, challenge me. Tell me I'm completely off beam by calling 0345 6060 973. Tweet and tell me how wrong I've got it on 84850. On text on 84850. Tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And as ever, of course, you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. And our first caller is Barry, who is a first-time caller from Norwich in Norfolk. Good morning, Barry.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I am well, but I have to be honest, Barry, I have said that the usual suspects always support military intervention, and they would say, actually, I'm one of the usual suspects who's always very cautious about the use of military intervention. But, are you convinced by the Prime Minister's arguments on this?
Nigel, I just put my head in my hands. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. This country in America have been at war with someone since 1991 with the first Gulf War. And it's just turned on and on and on. I don't believe a word this government says. I don't believe a word of it. Yeah, I don't see how firing missiles into Syria is going to help the Syrian people. I don't see how it's not in my national interest for them to do that. Yeah, and Donald Trump throwing out tweets about it's going to be worse than the Cold War and got smart new missiles coming over. You can't be doing things like that. It's just all wrong. And I personally believe the reason why she didn't go to Parliament was this, because she was scared, and I think she would have lost the vote.
Well, you see, that's interesting, Barry, isn't it? Because back in 2013, when Cameron and Osborne and Hague put this to Parliament, they thought, it'll be a breeze. But there were many of us on the outside campaigning hard in the constituencies, and there was a big rebellion. Miliband also changed, having equivocated, decided to come out against, and there were lots and lots of Tory rebels. And I do wonder, Barry, whether you're right, whether they feared they might lose a parliamentary debate. But Barry, let me put to you the Boris Johnson argument on this. Boris says that this is a big moral question, that since the First World War, chemical weapons have not been used, and that unless we're firm on this, the use of chemical weapons in future conflicts could become normalised.
Well, yeah, but we have no. It's the same with Salisbury. We have no concrete proof that the president of Syria fired give the authority, like in Russia. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? We don't. We go round. Do you know what I mean? I get the whole chemical weapons thing. I get it. Yeah, right. Yeah. But you can't just go off hook like that and just start. But
it's interesting you say that, Barry. It's interesting you say that, because on Salisbury, Boris has said again and again, it's a slam dunk. They did it. The Russians did it. No question. Have a listen, Barry, to what Boris has written in today's Sunday Telegraph. He says, a significant body of information, including intelligence, suggests the Assad regime was behind the chemical attack that killed about 75 people. And the reason they say this is that a helicopter was in the vicinity at the time, and the other side don't have helicopters. They're doing this, actually, on pretty flimsy evidence.
Do you know, if someone got arrested on that evidence and went to court, the court would sling it out due to lack of evidence.
Yes, they would. Yes, they would.
Sure, yeah, this wouldn't be allowed. I mean, Boris Johnson, he's a foreign secretary. He got that other one that looks like he should be in junior school as a defence secretary. And we got Theresa May.
He's the one that said Russia should shut up and go away, wasn't he?
You can't.
I wasn't sure his voice had broken, actually, Barry, when I heard that.
I lived through the 80s, right, with the Cold War. Yep. I was a teenager. And I was, and it was not a very nice place to be. And I'm a Trump supporter. I like him. I get him. But the other day when he was saying what he was saying, he actually did worry me.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. I thought, you know what? Because,
Barry, there are quite a lot of Trump supporters who are slightly concerned about this. Barry, thanks very much indeed for your call. And Barry, they're a first-time caller to the show who's got his head in his hands. Are you listening, newspaper editors? There are lots of people out there who take a very different view. That's what I think, anyway. Linda is calling from Manchester, another first-time caller. Good morning, Linda.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I am okay. So, what do you make of the positions of Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Donald Trump? What do you think?
Well, my opinion is that the only person that can actually has the knowledge, the experience, the parliamentary experience and the world experience to deal with this, to actually converse with Russia and President Putin to be, I like, don't like the man, but he has a very tough job, and I think he's the only person to be there, and so is Jeremy Corbyn. I think
Jeremy Corbyn?
Jeremy Corbyn would be the best person to speak to Vladimir Putin and all the regimes that are working at the moment.
I'll tell you what, Linda, I'm going to take issue with you on one point. You talked about world experience. Jeremy Corbyn has very little experience of the world at all. I mean, he has never really... He's never really been out there and worked in the real world. He's been in Parliament for 35 years.
But the young people like him.
Yes.
And he has managed to do to the party what my late MP, my friend, our family friend and late MP, Sir Joel Kaufman, God, I've lost my thread now, Nigel.
No, what do you... Look,
Spaniel's biting my hand as well.
The hazards of being at home on a Sunday. I mean, Linda, as I say, I don't believe Jeremy Corbyn has world experience at all.
Okay,
but I get your point. He's very popular with young people. He's multiplied the membership of the Labour Party, and those things clearly are achievements. I wouldn't, for one moment, want to take that away. But how could he, as an opposition leader, go to meet Putin? I mean, surely it's got to be the Prime Minister, hasn't it?
No. Well, first of all, obviously, we've got to get Jeremy as Prime Minister.
Right.
Of course, that's the plan.
Well, by then, I tell you what, Linda, by then, goodness knows how many more missiles we may well have fired off. But
hopefully,
no,
hopefully not. Waste of money when people are struggling with the NHS, the staff, the patients. It's horrendous. You need to get somebody in who will speak for the people.
So why, Linda? When Corbyn, and you may have heard a clip I played from Jeremy Corbyn earlier on the show. Right. Corbyn today is talking about procedure. He's talking about the legality of the attack. He's talking, about whether Parliament should have been consulted, and he believes it should.
Yes, it should, definitely.
But Jeremy Corbyn hasn't come out and spoken completely outright and said these attacks are wrong. Do you think he should?
I will not speak for Jeremy Corbyn. He's clearly absolutely capable of speaking for himself. But
he's not saying much.
Well, maybe he's keeping his powder dry, I think, and he knows what he thinks and what he's about to
Linda, what would you like him to say?
Oh, no, I'm not going to go down.
All right, OK, Linda, thanks for the call. Linda, a real Corbyn loyalist there, and your messages coming in. I totally agree with Theresa May's decisive action. Let's not forget, Russia has already carried out a chemical attack on UK soil, says Liz in Ruislip. And there was that linkage being made yesterday morning by Theresa May in her press conference. Sally says, what's the point of having UN red lines if you are not prepared to stand by them and take action? We tried talking, and Russia said no. You are completely wrong. Mari says, very wrong not to give MPs the chance to vote, as it's what Parliament is about. Yes, Mari, you could argue that, but equally you could say, why would you have a debate that warned your enemy, in inverted commas, of what you were about to do? Mind you could say, Trump had already done that, hadn't he, by saying the missiles are coming. Having, during his campaign, said that Obama was dumb to say what he would do before he did it. And I do begin to think, maybe there are a lot of people around the president from what Eisenhower 60 years ago called the military-industrial complex. He's obviously listening a lot to those people, or Trump actually believes morally he had no choice seeing those pictures of children. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 10:30. Well, I take the view that our track record on military intervention over the course of the last 15 years has been abysmal. The reasons we were given for going into Iraq have eroded public trust in government and in the whole democratic process. We have got rid of Arab nationalist dictators, albeit ones who were secular, and we've made the whole region destabilised. We've opened up the door for ISIS. We have got this wrong in the past. And you know something? Whether we like Assad or not, I'm sure we don't, the fact is, if he was to be removed, if we continued with these strikes because there were more use of chemical weapons, I think we would actually, given that he's just almost beaten ISIS militarily, give them a fresh lease of life. So I don't know. Apart from a short-term objective, I don't know what the bigger plan or the bigger game is here, but I'm listening to those same voices who I believe have been wrong on virtually everything else. And Tony says to me via text, he says, "Hi Nigel, what happens when the rebels use chemical weapons again? Do we bomb Assad also?" Well, this is the point, Tony. If I was part of that beleaguered rebel group who we know have chemical weapons, I'd make sure there was another chemical attack as quickly as there possibly could be, and to make it look like it was the Assad regime that did it, because then we've given the hostage to fortune already. The Americans say they're locked and loaded, and Theresa May says that we will strike again. So, my other problem with this is the reasons we are given for doing things. This is what Theresa May said yesterday morning.
I have taken this decision because I believe it is the right thing to do. I believe it is in our national interest.
Really? Well, please give us a call. Anybody from Number 10's press department, please give us a call and tell us how it is in our national interest to get involved in this Syrian conflict. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. Perhaps any of you, please tell me why I'm wrong. 0345 6060 973. And I say these things to you this morning, looking, as I say, at the newspaper editorials, and whilst one or two question whether Parliament should have been asked, virtually everybody this morning seems to think that the government have done the right thing. I don't. Tell me I am wrong. Linda on Facebook says, "Don't agree with the bombing. Look at the other countries we've meddled in. This will be no different. Just makes matters worse." Roger says, "Isn't it shocking that we no longer trust our own government and the things they tell us?" Shocking. Yes, Roger. And I think Tony Blair has an awful lot to answer for with his weapons of mass destruction warning. Ray, I agree with Nigel. It is definitely not in the nation's interests. Ray, it's this national interest point that I think, why did Theresa May choose to use that line, to emphasise it the way that she did yesterday morning? I just don't buy it. Tina says, "We should never go to war on supposition. Why do we keep acting before the investigations are complete and answers given?" Asif is calling from Battersea. Good morning, Asif.
Hello, Nigel. Unfortunately, I'm going to agree with you as well.
Oh, dear.
Like many of your callers. I mean, if we look at this and piece it together, geopolitically, I mean, we have actually supported ISIS by destabilising Assad. Now, the Americans, the British, the French, and the Israelis have been dropping bombs and basically on Assad positions, for God knows how long, and therefore basically supporting ISIS, because ISIS always seem to flow against the countries that basically we are trying to destabilise. So, for instance, you never see ISIS trying to attack Israel, the UAE, or basically Saudi Arabia. They're always attacking the very countries that we want to destabilise, and the neocons in the United States government that have basically wanted to destabilise and been talking about destabilising for the last 20 years. Plus, I mean, if you look at the weapons drops, the funding, Hillary Clinton has gone on record saying we potentially have funded ISIS through the Free Syrian Army. I mean, and all the big weapons drops.
Yeah, and that's exactly, Asif, exactly what Cameron's government wanted to do in 2013, and thank goodness they were beaten by a vote in Parliament.
I mean, the thing is, there's even a WikiLeaks cable saying that we're doing it through Saudi. I mean, you've got to, if you look and piece together WMB sexing up the dossiers, I mean, unfortunately, and this is a real shame because we have got some very good military men, but the only military men we are hearing from are the ones who are worried about their next cushy number in Whitehall, or, the ones who want to become politicians, or the next defence attaché in Whitehall. It's these career...
well, you'll be very pleased, Asif. You'll be very pleased to hear that a bit later on in the show, at about 11:30, I'm going to have the former First Sea Lord Admiral West is going to come onto this programme, and he actually is starting to ask some very real questions. Asif, I thank you very much for your thoughts and your call. You see, folks, I'm looking for callers telling me, tell me, Theresa May's got this absolutely right. Tell me it's in our national interests. Tell me that every single newspaper virtually today, has got it right. Tell me they're all right. Tell me that I've got this completely and utterly wrong. And yet I see a huge gulf between what is being said and thought in London by most of the political class and by a huge amount of the liberal mainstream media and how ordinary folk out there in the country feel. I've got a very strong hunch about this. Terry from Worthing says Parliament wasn't sitting and Donald wasn't going to wait. But Terry, the point Kate made was that Parliament could have been recalled for an emergency debate on Friday. I made the point that on the 3rd of April 1982, Parliament sat on a Saturday to discuss the Falklands War. How do I remember that? Because it was my 18th birthday. It wasn't that difficult to forget. But, if they'd really wanted Parliament to sit, it could have done so. Rex in Upton says, as usual, Mrs May has made the wrong call and Corbyn the right one. She's acting against her parliamentary remit. Well, legally, she has executive power. And let's just think about this. If the country actually was directly under threat, if we knew there were bomber planes headed for Britain, and we had 35 minutes notice, clearly Parliament couldn't be recalled. And of course, we would want our government to have the ability to act in that situation. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But I think the argument for Parliament having a say is that, in fact, we weren't under direct threat ourselves at all. In fact, the even stronger argument is that nothing in our national interest was being threatened at all, which is maybe why she made that argument yesterday morning, that it was in our national interest. I don't really care myself, whether Parliament had a vote on this or not. I just don't think we're doing the right thing. And if you think about this week, the idea that this week there'll be a debate and maybe a retrospective vote on something that's happened already, well, that frankly would be, I think, just a little bit pointless. Chris says, I'm glad someone has the courage to stand up and do what is right. I don't know which side you're referring to, Chris, but hey, I'm normally with you 100%, but definitely not on this. We did a joint demonstration to show Putin that, well, okay, the Syrian strike is a token demonstration and a test of Putin's defences. Rick in Manchester, if you want to play poker with Vladimir Putin, you can do so. I would recommend that we're just a little bit cautious, perhaps, about doing that. Nigel, this has nothing to do with Syria. There is money in war, and the US, UK and France have spotted an opportunity. Well, that's very, very deeply cynical. Everyone said it was going to be World War III when Trump challenged North Korea. Now they are meeting at the table. Agreed. Please do not confuse Trump with Bush and Blair. Trump keeps all the options open. Trump's believe in peace through strength. Yeah, OK. Look, I've been a big supporter of Trump's foreign policy, huge supporter of what he's done with Saudi Arabia, saying to them, reform, change, and we will start doing business with you in a big way, and reform is happening. What he's done with North Korea, when everybody else tried to brush it under the carpet, was great. I'm just not sure on this that the president has actually got this right, but it may well be. It may well be he does have the next couple of moves on the chessboard planned, and none of us know it. Graham says the national interest is oil, energy and money. Well, and security may just come in there, Graham, somewhere too. Neil is calling from... How do I pronounce the name of your town, Neil?
St Asaph.
St Asaph. Where is that?
In North Wales.
Right, I've learnt something this morning. Neil, the floor is yours.
I don't necessarily support the strike, but I can see why, Theresa May feels it is in the national interest. She, along with yourself, to be honest, has fought elections based on reducing immigration, and by her bombing Syria, I suppose it's less likely that the Syrians are going to come over here.
Neil, I do understand. I do understand that destabilisation and war mean that people want to flee. And that, there've been numbers of Syrians trying to cross the Mediterranean, albeit they've been piggybacked on by people from all over the world who try to use the opportunity. But I understand that point. Okay, Neil, let me put it to you the other way round.
Okay.
If we go on sending missiles because there are seen to be more chemical attacks, and if the effect of what we do, albeit I will admit this was smaller scale than I'd feared, but if the effect of all of this was that Assad actually got removed, that we finished up with regime change, I put it to you, Neil, that if ISIS started to return in strength to that area, bringing with them their sheer barbarism, that actually the numbers of people fleeing Syria would increase, not decrease, as a result of what we'd done.
Oh, no, to be honest, Nigel, I totally agree with you. I was being sarcastic with my original point.
Oh, sorry. I missed it. No, gosh, I must get out more, Neil, mustn't I?
I think it's very, very strange that Theresa May and the government have said that they will not bring in Syrian refugees, including was it 5,000 Syrian children?
Yeah.
And said that they wouldn't bring them over from Calais, but at the same, but she's so concerned of the welfare of them because now that Assad is using chemical weapons, obviously bombing them with conventional weapons is a much better idea. So it's that aspect of it. I don't think the children of Syria actually really care which way they're killed. I think they just want the whole thing to stop.
So is it better to leave Assad and the Russians to drive ISIS out of Syria and to say leave well alone?
Is it better to... Sorry.
Is it better to leave Assad and the Russians to drive ISIS out and to leave things well alone?
Assad and the Russians should be driving ISIS out, but perhaps the United Nations should be considering doing a joint effort in removing ISIS from all countries. Now that I tell you what, Neil, if the United Nations came up with a resolution like that, I would think that great big building on 2nd Avenue, which interestingly has the lights on all night in every single office, I would then think it might be worth the money. Great suggestion, Neil. I thank you. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's now 10:47. Nigel, if Mrs May says we had to act to stop chemical weapons being used in a far-off land, why did we not bomb Russia, who has used chemical weapons on our shores against British citizens? Hypocrite is a word that springs to mind, says Ali in Northampton. Well, yes, I don't think... What is interesting, Ali, about what was done by the USA, the UK and France, but pointedly not Germany, Merkel making that very, very clear. Clearly what was done was designed not to embroil the Russians in this conflict, and that again shows what really quite dangerous territory we are treading on here. Syria and Russia, not only allies, but they've been fighting there together for the last few years against the rebels, and a big chunk of those rebels have in fact turned out to be extremists in the shape of ISIS. Everyone said it would be World War III when Trump challenged North Korea, but imagine if things escalated and Boris Johnson was our foreign secretary. Well, there we are. Not all of you think Boris would be the right man in the situation of World War III. I don't know. What does John in Golders Green think?
Hi, Nigel. You there?
I certainly am.
I've never disagreed with you ever since you came to public prominence, but I have to disagree with you now.
Okay.
This is not about Syria. This is about chemical weapons, pure and simple. And to not respond would to be condoning it, and to move that red line, whatever it is, a little bit further back. And I would like to feel that our response would have been the same had it been in any other country that had been proved to be using chemical weapons. I would just like to address the previous text you wrote before I came on, which is why we're not responding to Russia in the same way. Clearly, we bombed 3 chemical weapons sites of importance in Syria. Russia, I guess one wouldn't know where to start and would be an entirely different situation. However, we do have to respond to Russia, and we have responded to Russia. I don't think our response has gone anywhere far enough. I think FIFA on Monday morning should walk in and announce that the whole World Cup is being relocated. Not us, not us boycotting it, but FIFA should simply announce that the World Cup is relocating. It would be very simple to do. We could host it, Germany could host it, France could host it. We've got all the infrastructure, and that would send a much more powerful message to the Russians than any individual country.
Yes, I mean, if you wanted real international disapproval of Mr. Putin, that would be a very effective way of doing it. Of course, the World Cup being a massive showcase for Putin and Russia, all of which made me wonder why you'd want to knock out a spy who defected to the other side 12 years ago and was living in retirement in a small close in Salisbury,
but Nigel, that
and risk all of that
anymore.
And risk all of that
anymore because forget about that. Let's assume they had nothing to do with it, and there have been all kinds of theories about that, which I've been listening to for the last 6 weeks. But in the case of Syria, they have openly been seen to be supporting the use of chemical weapons, and that is enough to make them culpable.
Okay, John, you know, I mean, there were roughly 1 million soldiers on the Western Front affected by gas during from 1915 to 1918, and Indeed, many of them were dying decades later, you know, having suffered mustard gas and lived pretty ghastly lives. And I'm old enough to remember people who had suffered from mustard gas and they were very, very debilitated by it. So the 1925, you know, the world comes together, bans the use of chemical weapons and gas. And in World War II, on the battlefield, you know, those weapons are not used at all. And I understand what you're saying. But, John, do you not have to be absolutely convinced that Assad was guilty of this attack when you know that the other side have chemical weapons and have used them as well?
I don't think they have to be absolutely convinced because, as I just said, it's not about Assad, it's not about regime change, it's not about Syria. It's about destroying the chemical weapons facilities that are proven to be there.
Okay,
and that's why Theresa May said what she said. And that's why I have to disagree with you on that.
All right.
Because it is good for the country that we do this because we have to do it.
Well, you know, Boris Johnson says a significant body of information, including intelligence, suggests that the Assad regime was behind the chemical attack. Doesn't sound very sure to me, but yours is a bigger, broader point that it is about chemical weapons. And, John, that's a very principled position. I just worry sometimes about what the real motives behind these things are. And I'm pleased, John, that the strikes were as limited as they were, because when I listened to the language that was coming from Trump, I thought, gosh, something absolutely massive is about to happen. So, John, having done this, and don't forget we did the same thing, or the Americans did the same thing last year, what do you think we should do next?
I think we should wait and see, but I definitely think that FIFA should walk in on Monday morning and relocate the World Cup.
Okay, we've got the FIFA point, John, thank you, and I've no doubt, actually, that what John raises there about FIFA is something that we'll debate over the course of the coming weeks, given this deterioration that we've got. Amal is a first-time caller from Tunbridge Wells. Good morning.
Good morning, Sir Nigel. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Great show. Really enjoying the topics of discussion.
Good.
I've got to say one thing before I say anything else.
Yep.
The political classes won't, but you are a knight in our hearts. I think you've done a fantastic job to invoke the whole Brexit scenario. With this topic currently being talked about, listen, we have got Brexit on our doorstep. We're dealing with this situation, which is very important domestically. Instead, we are pursuing Syria, who hasn't attacked us or any of our interests. And if it is even proven that chemical weapons were used, there are so many more countries in and around Syria, Middle East, Saudi, etc., who have got a great responsibility to deal with their neighbours and us, a European country far away. Do we want Syrian refugees turning up on our doorstep because of our involvement? Do we really need more problems? We have got to deal with domestic issues and Brexit. The Prime Minister's focus should be purely on this matter and not involving herself in issues that are not directly connected to us. Humanitarian reasons. If that was the case, where was our efforts with the Burmese people, Rohingyans, when they were being killed? Is the child's life less valuable in Burma than it is in Syria?
Well, you're right, of course, Amal. I mean, the
very, very clearly minded view on these things.
Yeah, the government have published, indeed, their legal basis for taking this action. And yes, humanitarian intervention is the main reason that is given in it. But as you say, we are quite selective, are we not, about where we decide to intervene for humanitarian reasons. And well, let me ask you the other question that my last caller felt very strongly about, John, that you know, chemical weapons, the use of chemical weapons is abominable, and we ought to do our best to stop them from ever being used again.
Absolutely agree, but So many abominable things are taking place around the world. Can we afford to get involved in every one of them?
No.
If we can get involved in every one, that's one thing. But selectively getting involved when it is not in our domestic interest, really? Is that what we need to focus on now? Theresa May, I am a grassroots Tory supporter.
Yep.
Theresa May became PM through default, and she was initially considered to be the best of a bad bunch, but truly she's made complete hash of things. She should have brought you in and said, right, all of you who wanted out should now get the best deal for UK Limited. Instead, we've got Boris going around causing complete mayhem. We need to get Jacob Rees-Mogg in charge of this country and get this country...
Well, Amal, as a grassroots Tory member, you will have a say on that at some point in time. You really will. And I tell you what, Amal, they were out of touch. The political mainstream were out of touch on the European debate. They thought being a member of the European Union was a settled issue, and this UKIP lot and this wretched Farage bloke, they're just a little annoyance. Let's promise a referendum, they'll all go away, it'll all be fine, and they were wrong. And you know what, Amal? I think on continued military intervention, whatever reasons they give us, I think they're wrong about this, I think the media are wrong about this, I think there are a lot of people out there in this country feel very, very strongly that we've had enough military intervention. Amal, I thank you. I've quickly got time for Robert from Bristol. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Nigel. Hypocrisy. I've just been watching the US, and there is a lot to be said for Trump, in my opinion. But I've heard them sounding off about the use of chemical weapons, as if, oh God, they wouldn't dare think of them. When in fact, my memory, you see, a lot of people who haven't got a very long memory, it probably comes with me being so old, but I remember a war called Vietnam.
Yes.
And the foraging over the forests and jungles. They used tons and tons and tons of chemical weapons. They dropped chemical canisters. They distorted the growth of Vietnamese people. I saw pictures of babies and children with growing things that shouldn't ever be on their bodies, and that was via the USA. So I don't want them to come along and wave their finger. You see, you get lots of people that are good at doing that, but they're not very good at what they do. I remember the use of chemical weapons.
Robert, you've made a very powerful point. The use of napalm, Agent Orange, and all those things that did happen in Vietnam and happened on a huge scale. Robert, useful contribution. Thank you. Well, Theresa May is continuing to talk to Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump since the airstrikes in Syria. I guess the real question I want to start debating in the next hour is, should Britain take part in further airstrikes if this situation escalates? Are you happy for this to move on from being a one-off strike to perhaps being something more concerted if chemicals are used again by whatever side in this conflict? If you think we've got to stay there all the way through, call 0345 6060 973. If you think no, enough's enough, text 84850. Or maybe you want regime change and remove Assad. Tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch us on Facebook. Comment there too. We're live from London next.